Good morning. We're going to start recording and give us just one more second to turn on one more microphone. We'll get started here.
All right, Josh, we can go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. A few quick notes before we get started. If everyone can just start off before you say anything with your name, that'll help us all keep track of who's who. So I'm Josh Gaither. Shelley, go ahead with the roll call.
Amber Prince.
Amber Prince is present.
Thank you. Candace Williams.
Present.
Carrie Lewis.
Present.
Corbin King. Dale Woolridge.
This is Dale.
Danielle Stillo. Garth Gamer. Jeff Valentine.
Present.
Heather Miller.
On the phone.
James Cessalini. James Cunningham. Josh Gaither.
Here.
Julie Augenstein. Laura Smith.
Here.
Melissa Moyer. Michelle Guadagnola. Pam Nolan. Pam Goslar. Paul Dabrowski. Ralph Kelly. Ray Proa.
Ray Pro, present.
Rebecca Haro.
Rebecca Harrell is present.
Sean Boker.
Present.
Tiffany Streever. Tom Flanagan.
Shelley, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Josh.
All right, thanks very much. Let's go ahead and continue then. So the first item on the agenda is the chairman's report. We'll start off with the attendance report. If you can all look at attachment 3A on the minutes, you'll see the attendance report. Just a friendly reminder to everybody, if you miss 2 consecutive meetings, the Bureau will reach out to you to ask if you're still interested in serving on the committee. And thank you to everybody today for participating. I know everybody's super busy and has lots of other things on your mind at the very least. So I do appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy day to call in and participate in this meeting. Moving on, we do have 2 new members. I'd like to recognize first Jeff Valentine, who is the pre-hospital EMS coordinator for AIMS. He's also a detective and EMS coordinator for Phoenix Police Department Safety Unit. Jeff, thank you for participating and welcome to our group.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Our other new member is Sean Boker. Sean is the stab liaison. He's also the injury prevention and outreach coordinator and for trauma services with Northern Arizona Healthcare. Sean, thank you for joining our group. All right, with that, the last thing I have to go over is that the TEPI bylaws and roster roles are due for review in 2020. I believe, Terry Mullins, you may have a timeline available for anyone who's interested in what the review of those rules would look like. Is that correct?
Good morning, Josh. This is Terry. What we will do, because this is an effort that we're going to coordinate across the standing committees, is that we will come up with a plan and share it with each of the committees so that it can be a kind of a mirror process across the board.
Thank you very much, Terry. Moving on then, the next item on our agenda is the Bureau report. Julia, I believe you have an EMS for Children update.
Hi, yes. Just briefly, I think the most notably, we have been working on our Safe Sleep education module for EMS providers. We've had 2 work groups, and we'll be continuing to work on that. Additionally, the National EMS for Children data collection is going on right now, so we have a little bit over 104 survey participants, and that survey will close at the end of March. That's all.
Okay, Julia, thanks very much. Terry or Ben, any other Bureau updates that you would like to add?
Not at this time, Josh.
This is Ben.
Okay.
I'll just briefly say that we continue to do some testing with the trauma registry AZ peers linkage, so that is something that is useful for the trauma registrars. So stay tuned for more information about that, so that hopefully that is done and useful for the trauma registrar shortly.
Okay, thank you both, Terry and Ben. Moving on to our discussion and action items. Discussion and action item number A. Can I have a request? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Ray Proa with a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Ray. I have a motion to approve. Can I have a motion to second?
Rebecca Hara will second the motion.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any discussion or changes needed to the minutes? We will just take a few minutes to review real quickly, so take a look at those as we scroll through them on the screen here. Okay, hearing no discussion, I'd like to call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the last TEPI meeting, say aye.
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 Any not in favor of approving, say nay. Okay, hearing no negative responses, the minutes from the last meeting are approved as are without any changes. Let's move on then to the next agenda item. The next agenda item is to discuss the sequence for discretionary reports in 2020. This is included in your agenda. I believe it's the final page, attachment 5B. Can I have a motion to discuss the sequence of discretionary reports?
Rebecca will make a motion to discuss the sequence of reports.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can I have a second?
Amber Prince will second.
Thank you. We have a second. Now let's open discussion for the sequence of reports. This is a standing agenda item. As you can see on both attachment 5 and the screen currently, this is a list of the current suggested topics of interest from this group that the DHS may decide to do discretionary reports on when they have adequate time, staffing, all that type of stuff. Take a look at these. We can reorder. We can add to this. I'll open the microphone to anyone with suggestions or concerns.
Josh, this is Rebecca Haro. Looking at the first one on the list, I think it is still important to monitor this, but I'm not sure it needs to be number one at the top of the list. I would like to hear what my peers suggest about this one.
Sorry, Rebecca, just to clarify, are you referring to the final motion restriction?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
So Rebecca, your suggestion would then be to move spinal motion restriction down on the priority list. Where do you think it would fit in most appropriately as a continuing priority to look at on this list of essentially 1 to 6 or 7?
I would move it down to probably the middle of the page. Like I said, I don't want it to go away. I believe there's value. I want us to make sure we're catching early any trends if we maybe need to revise our current standards and protocols. But so I want it monitored, but I don't think it's our number one priority. I've not been getting any feedback that there are ongoing problems with spinal motion restriction in pre-hospital.
Okay, I think that's a great suggestion. Hearing no one opposed, perhaps we'll modify this list so that number 1 now reads safety issues / adverse events associated with administration of Narcan. Then our next bullet list is air medical transport. Next bullet list, spinal motion restriction. Any concerns with that change? And again, this is an ongoing agenda item. It's not a voting item, and we have lots of flexibility with this. Okay, hearing no other comments or suggestions, we'll make that change. And unless, I'll leave it open for another minute. Unless someone else has another thought or concern, we'll move to the next agenda item. I did just get a note that there are several individuals on the phone alone who can't see this list. So let me run through it verbally for those who are on the phone. And again, these are suggested topics that may be of interest. So the list would now read: first topic of interest, safety issues and adverse events associated with administration of Narcan. Number 2 would read air medical transport. Consider air medical transport of non-trauma and interfacility transports. Number 3 would read spinal motion restriction safety. Number 4, evaluate effectiveness of safety interventions proposed by IPAC. That's a non-specific recommendation. Evaluate safety and usage of epinephrine when and if we ever do move from auto-injectors to intramuscular as a skill. Evaluate missing EMS trauma registry data fields. That's our next agenda item. And then scene death reporting from firearms and other topics. Okay, hearing no further discussion, we will make the recommended changes to this list of priorities and readdress it at the next meeting. Let's move on then to agenda item C. This agenda item is to discuss, amend, and approve recommendations to the EMS Council regarding thresholds for cactus data completeness standards. So to start this discussion off, I just need a motion and a second to discuss this topic.
This is Rebecca. I'll make a motion to have this discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca.
This is Ray Pro. I'll second it.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn over the discussion, I believe, to Dr. Bradley, who has the original draft document that was created by the EMS Registry Users Group.
Thank you, Josh. So we are going to give a little bit of background to just the ask that had come from EMS Council to TEPI. EMS Council had asked probably about 9 months ago that TEPI make a recommendation to them to kind of set the standard for data completion that EMS Council would then use to essentially decide on what would be a cutoff for Premier EMS Agency or PEEP status. And because of some issues we had running the data, it just took us a little longer than expected. But we did get the first and second quarter reports out to all the agencies a few months ago. And then EMSRUG met last month and went over these and kind of made some recommendations to bring forward to this committee for this committee to then vote and hopefully approve and then make recommendations to EMS Council. So that's just a little bit of background on what is going on with that. In case we get a lot of discussion on this, we're just going to ask if people are online, if they can use the chat box to just let us know if you want to speak up. We'll call on you by name. That way we don't hopefully have too many people kind of talking over one another. For those who are online, I'm going to have us scroll down. When we look at the core data elements, so there's just over 2 pages for the core data elements, and overwhelmingly we are doing very well with these. Just some discussion, what we'll point out anytime there's some low numbers is on the top of page 2, lines 34 and 35. 2 of the things that were identified and discussed at EMSRUG meeting was the fact that medication allergies and current medications are both pretty low percentages. One of the things that we want to help agencies to identify is if EMS doesn't have that information, there are fields that you can click in your EPCR system that would suffice to answer that question. So if it's left blank, then you don't get credit for data completion. But if you document unable to obtain, there's various different options that you can utilize. And so that's one of the pieces that we identified. We can help provide education to the agency to take back to their personnel of what to select if they don't have the answers to those different fields. Any discussion on the medication and allergy lines? And just a reminder, please, since we are trying to do this with a lot of people on the phone today, if you are not speaking for the meeting, please keep your phone or computer on mute. The next line that had some discussion back and forth at EMSRUG was line 49, which is response to procedure. And this was where the EMSRUG group really had some good suggestions. Some agencies who have a high percentage in this line basically have said that they made that a mandatory field. And so the recommendation to make sure that we get a good response to this answer is to make that a mandatory field. So that was a suggestion from that group. Line 50, which is the advanced air replacement confirmation with end-tidal CO2. This number is at just under 60%, and the EMSRA group felt that this was a data element that we should really just increase education to EMS about making sure they're documenting their end-tidal CO2 anytime they do any type of airway placement. The vital signs are all 54 through 57. Those are pretty good numbers, but what we recognize is that almost every EMS encounter, patients are getting a full set of vital signs. And so we just want to make sure this is a reminder because this should be an easy one to improve. So currently statewide, the standard completion is at 87%. And the EMSRUG committee made a recommendation to raise that to 90%. So that would be the first voting item for this group will be to increase the core data element for completion standard of 90%. So wanted to get some feedback and thoughts on that. Yes,
we have a question from, oh, there you go.
I'm not sure if everyone heard the answer. So Jeff Valentine's question was, is this from EPCR only? And the answer is yes. So this is only from EPCR records. Any other thoughts or concerns about raising that data completion standard to 90% for the core data elements? All right, we will move on to the next topics. So if we can scroll down.
Dr. Bradley.
Oh, yes,
sorry,
go ahead.
So just to make things simple, Dr. Bradley and Terry and Shelley, would you like to vote, have this vote independently on each of these issues, or vote as a single motion at the end?
Probably easier if we vote on a single issue, and if there's any discussion pieces that we kind of talk about in the discussion and make a recommendation to adjust or change. If that works for you, Josh.
Okay, will do.
So on page 6, there was a couple items that EMSRUG recommended deleting, and I wanted to bring those forward. So I'll go to line 9 and 10. So one recommended deletion of the data element was line 9, which is respiratory effort. The EMSRUG group recommended that we eliminate that data element. So it's only actually required in the trauma data element. It's not required in any of the other disease categories. The next data element that EMSRUG also recommended deleting was the blood glucose level, which is line 10. Part of the rationale for that is understanding how patients get into the trauma data element. And so in order to get into this patient population, you may have a number of patients that don't necessarily need to have a blood glucose taken. And so their recommendation was to delete this because really we don't want to necessarily push people to just obtain an AccuCheck to complete a record. Any thoughts or discussion on that one? Okay, thank you, Jeff. One of the things that we recognized that we wanted to get some education out to EMS is line 15, so alcohol and drug use education. So this percentage is pretty low right now. It's at 56.9% for the state for data completion. This is something that obviously plays a large role in trauma and is a big safety issue for patients in identifying their risk for going into withdrawal and other issues related to their substance abuse issues. This is also important for grants, for several grants that are out there for opioid-related issues. And so while that percentage point is low, our goal is to give education to EMS that will help them kind of take the time to answer that question. All right, any thoughts on that? The next big category that is really going to be a piece that we'll need this group to weigh in on is lines 17 through 21. So this is our trauma center criteria, and then also kind of the different safety things. So things related to airbag deployment, use of safety equipment, location of patient in the vehicle, and height of fall, so in feet. These percentages are all pretty low right now. The reason that this is really important is that we, the trauma registries nationwide have to obtain that information from the drop-down fields in the EPCR system. So it's a national standard that all the trauma centers, as part of their verification, need that field. So right now, if that's in your narrative, they really can't use that information. So the description of the event is always very helpful in the narrative, but those specific drop-down items, they really need documented in those drop-down fields in the EPCR system. And so this is something that we're hopefully with education to EMS of if you're doing a trauma alert, making sure that we document those e-injury codes, which are lines 17 through 21. And I don't know if any of the trauma center representatives want to weigh in on that.
Hey Gail, it's Heather from Kingman. So I was just looking at the numbers with our guys too. You know, those numbers a lot in our registry because that's what the registry asks us as well, so that we can get that data in, so that we can get clean data out. That's why it's so important. I know our guys up in Kingman have made, if any of those trigger like a motor vehicle accident, it automatically asks them those questions to be able to answer, and it's mandatory up here.
Thank you, Jeff. So again, those numbers aren't things that we really can recommend removing because it is a requirement for the trauma centers, but hopefully this is something that we can push education to really start improving documentation in that piece. Just above that is line 16, which is the destination pre-arrival and alert date and time. Across the board, our pre-arrival documentation numbers are pretty low for all the time-sensitive illness and injuries. And so we really hope that as part of the education and training for EMS, we can help just emphasize the importance of documenting that field. So currently as a state, we are meeting 19% data, so 1.9 completion standard for trauma. The EMSRA group recognized that this was an area where we probably need to do the most education to improve those scores. And so they actually recommended keeping this at 19% for this upcoming year. So for those who are not on the computer, there was a comment from Sean Boker. We don't get law enforcement reports from the trauma centers, very labor intensive. So I think this again goes back to they do need to get this from the EPCR from EMS. And then Dr. Gamer also put a vote to retain the trauma center elements, I'm guessing as is, Garth.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yes, my vote would be to retain those as is. For the Thomas.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you very much. Any concerns about keeping the recommended data completion standard at 19% for this upcoming year for trauma? Again, this is probably one of the areas where there'll need to be the most education to EMS to start improving those scores, which will take some time. All right, hearing no objections to that piece, we will move on to stroke. So for stroke, currently, one of the things that was brought up is that some agencies were not using last known well time or onset of symptoms. They were using duration. With stroke, especially with the time frame that we need for TPA administration being a very distinct number, the recommendation from EMSRUG was to keep this as last known well time. So for agencies that may be still using duration instead of last known well time or onset, especially for stroke, that would need to be adjusted, and that's line 1. Stroke scale and score, so the type and score, which are lines 5 and 6. Currently, we're about 48/49% for completion of this. I think across the board, EMS is always doing a stroke score. I think this is something where the agencies will need to review with their EPCR system to make sure that this is an area that report is actually getting across. So I know consistently I feel comfortable saying EMS is doing a stroke score on patients, but just making sure that where it's documented, it actually goes across into the EPCR system and can be read by AZ peers. And then again, the date and time of pre-activation arrival and alert. One suggested adjustment that came from EMSRUG was that if the duration of symptoms was less than 24%, that would be your indication to do a pre-arrival alert. So a point that was put up was that you may have some patients who've had a stroke, but they don't call for over 24 hours. So EMS would not document a stroke alert because this patient doesn't meet stroke alert criteria. So that was a great feedback from the EMSRUG committee. So that will be adjusted moving forward. So if your onset of symptoms is less than 24 hours, then you would be in the denominator for requiring the stroke alert pre-arrival activation. We see a question from, yes. There's still confusion if you have onset of symptoms versus last known well time. To me, these are still different times. Yes, you are correct, Amber. It's one or the other. So it's documenting that you either have the last known well time or the onset. What some agencies were using was actually duration of symptoms. And duration of symptoms was problematic because it's not really giving you a definitive time. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, yes, I was just typing that out. It answers the question. It just still more has a lot of leeway as to confusion, I think, for the EMS field, what time is truly helpful to the hospitals. I think when the hospitals use a lot of the statements of time of symptom onset, then that's all the EMS providers are getting. It's not truly are needing in order to make that TPA determination.
Yes, and that's definitely something agencies need to really kind of try to do education to their personnel to understand the difference of onset, whereas it's a witness onset versus a patient is found with symptoms and then determining the last known well time, because that does make a difference of whether or not you can give TPA.
Perfect. It's better than what we had.
Yes. So currently for stroke completion standard, we are at 25%. The recommendation from the EMSRUG group was to keep it at 25% for now, for the next year. Any questions or comments?
Gail, it's Josh Gaither. I can't type that fast, so a quick question. I may have been a little confused at the beginning. At the beginning, I thought you said the EMSRUG group was recommending a minimum overall data completeness of 90%. Now we're talking about different data completeness percentages for each subset. Can you clarify what the EMSRA group was recommending?
Sorry, yes, thank you for clarifying that. I think I've looked at this so many times, it's intuitive to me, but probably not intuitive to anyone else. So there are different, each section has a data completion standard. So the core data elements, that has a data completion standard currently at 87%, with a recommendation to increase it to 90%. Then on top of that, each individual disease entity has their own data completion standard. So in the CACTUS report, if you look at page 5 at the bottom, there's 87%, which is for the core data elements. Their recommendation was to increase that to 90%. If you go to page 6, currently for trauma, we're at 19%, and the recommendation is to keep that one at 19%. And then for stroke, these percentages are specific to these data elements, which are disease specific. Does that make more sense?
Yes, thank you.
So the core data elements are in all the EPCRs because they're kind of your basic data about the patient, and then these are the specific elements to the specific disease entity. Thank you for asking that. So I think when you look at something, you just figure everyone else understands it, but I would hope everyone else doesn't look at this nearly as much as we do. Any further discussion about stroke?
And I'm sorry, what was the recommended data completion for stroke again?
They recommended keeping this at 25%. All right. Next page is STEMI data elements. So STEMI data elements, we are at a 0% completion standard. So we are unfortunately not doing great with this, and part of this is just helping EMS to identify where to document this. So one of the things, when you look at aspirin administration, I think our EMS system is really good in that patients are often advised to take aspirin by phone when they call for medical help, or they're at a doctor's office, or at an urgent care that's identifying a STEMI and they're getting aspirin. So if the aspirin is taken prior to arrival and that's not documented on the run sheet, the assumption is that they did not get aspirin. So especially line 1, which is your medication given aspirin, currently we are at 56%, but I think this will be giving EMS some tips on how to better document that. So that way we identify, yes, we try to get the patient aspirin, but they've already received this. So that's going to be one of the education pieces moving forward. The oxygen discussion comes up quite a bit. So the oxygen administration, just so everyone understands, if you look at the N number, so the total STEMI data elements are 1,600 patients. Oxygen administration is 1,385. That number is smaller because it only is looking for oxygen administration if your oxygen saturation is less than 94%. So just wanted to make sure that everyone understands they have worked really hard in the background of kind of identifying some of these pieces to build this. Again, the pre-arrival alert and activation time is pretty low percentages at 42 and 39%. As you can see, the fewer lines you have in a section, the harder it is to meet a data completion standard. So currently, if you got one line that you got above 90%, that would take you to a 16% completion standard. And so the recommendation from the EMSRA group was to basically say, currently we're at 0% with some education. They felt that this could go up to 16%, which is 1/6 pretty easily.
Just another quick point of clarification. We also look to make sure that for aspirin administration, if there are any allergies or other pertinent negatives why aspirin was not administered, you will still get credit for those.
Any further discussion or concerns about the STEMI data?
This is Matt Shaw. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Matt.
For the oxygen, is it any oxygen saturation below 94? So anytime it pops up in the EPCR that the sat dropped below that? So, you know, like sometimes the waveform might be bad, a blood pressure is being taken, it's on the same hand, or on the same arm rather, and so you might get a low sat even though they've consistently been satting 95, 96%. Would that trigger oxygen needing to be applied when the data is being drawn?
I am passing that to Ben, who is frantically texting Voxel to find out how they pull that data element.
We might have to look. I don't want to give you a bad answer. Hang on 1 second.
Okay. No problem. My other question is the lines 5 and 6, the destination team pre-arrival alerts, and then the date time. Those pop up in several of the different data categories. And I'm just curious where you're pulling that data from, because I've spoke with our vendor and we're not exactly sure where our crews should be charting that. So I'm just wondering if, like, ours are 0%. I'm wondering if other agencies statewide, it's so low because it's just not exactly clear where it should be charted.
So if you have spoken to your vendor, what I would say is that what you're seeing on the left-hand side where it says edisposition.24, that is the NEMSIS variable your vendor should be familiar with. That is the standard thing your vendor should know what we're talking about. If they have questions beyond that, we can have them talk to Ann, but that variable is what they should know where it's mapped in their software to either a switch or a drop down or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
This is what, so those element numbers, those are the exact name of the data elements in the data dictionary. So that's how you can find it out, how we are coming up with this particular data element.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions, STEMI, or we will move on to cardiac arrest? All right, so for cardiac arrest, currently the data completion, if we can scroll down just a little bit to see the bottom of that, is we are at 10% for this. This one has quite a few data elements in it, and a lot of these elements are part of the shared cardiac arrest registry. So these are elements where once you kind of open that window in your EPCR system, if you say cardiac arrest, yes, you should then kind of see all of these data elements. What we've identified as a training issue for agencies is that sometimes on the way to a call, someone will start the EPCR, they'll automatically click cardiac arrest no, which then hides all of these questions. But the share questions are about 10 of the questions on here. So one of the things we really felt would be an easy educational item for EMS is just to remind them that if you, for some reason, you're on the way to the call and someone started it and it ended up being a cardiac arrest, that you make sure that someone on the crew goes back and says cardiac arrest yes, because that will then populate all of these questions. So right now, the data completion standard is at 10%. EMS actually recommended increasing this to 50%. So this was the only one where they recommended a substantial increase in the information that was in there. One of the things that we recognized, if you look at line 11, procedure CPR performed. Currently, because of the way a lot of people put CPR documentation in the narrative versus the drop-down or treatment section, it shows that only 54% of cardiac arrest patients are getting CPR. I feel very comfortable that 100% of cardiac arrest patients in Arizona are getting CPR from EMS, but this is, again, one of those training pieces. So the EMSRA group really pretty universally felt they wanted to be a little bit more kind of aggressive on this one. Arizona leads the nation in cardiac arrest research and resuscitation and efforts, and have kind of guided a lot of the work we do nationally, thanks to Dr. Bobro's work prior. So they wanted to increase this to 50%. So that would be a big jump. But part of this is just recognizing that if you make sure people say yes to cardiac arrest, this would then populate all of those, a lot of these questions. James Cunningham is the one lone person who came here in person today, and he's thinking. So we can see his facial expression debating this in his mind. All right, he's up. Perfect.
So when what's listed inside the report, are we looking at arrest where we have confirmed action by the crews, or are we looking at cardiac arrest in general, where a crew would get on scene, there is the patient confirmed in 3 leads, and that's it?
Great question. So there I have the cheat sheet that was very nicely put together by Anne. So cardiac arrest, this is where this does not include like your quote 901H criteria. So this, yes, that excludes that.
Cool.
So Amber, I see your question. Are you referring to them meeting obvious death criteria or termination of resuscitation criteria? So if they meet termination of resuscitation, that would mean that some type of care was administered, so that would get them into the patient population. If they met obvious death criteria, they would not get into the patient population. And Ben and Vatsal, please correct me if I'm incorrect in that.
Might have to get back to you if we need to look through that, but Vatsal's on the line.
Okay.
Gail, I think what I was trying to ask was that we do have some patients who they don't meet obvious death criteria, but don't get worked if they were like prolonged downtime and, you know, they put them on a 3-lead and they're asystole and it's presumed to be a prolonged downtime. They may not meet what we consider obvious death criteria, but they meet our termination criteria and they don't get worked. And then we have different termination criteria for those that are not of presumed prolonged downtime, and those would get worked. But we do have ones that we don't consider obvious death, but are checked on a 3-lead for consideration of withholding resuscitative efforts from the beginning. So I just didn't know if those were considered the same thing or if those were considered separate.
So we will, I know Vatsal and Ben are kind of looking at that right now just to make sure we give the correct answer to that question. So, and Amber, just to clarify as well, since you do a lot of work with SHARE, in terms of the SHARE questions regarding resuscitation, would you want those answered or not answered in that population?
Which questions were you thinking of?
Just, I think their lines, if you have the report in front of you, it's the e-arrest code questions. So line, I think 7 through 17.
Yeah.
So Amber, this might be a partial answer to your question from Anne. So if the crews pick a disposition that indicates that there was no resuscitation attempted, then that would exclude them from the population.
Okay, okay.
Anne is obviously using voice to text. Thank you both, Anne and Basil.
This is James. So then...
Sorry, I am looking at the restrictions on those things. So just give me a minute to check what are the restrictions, because if you see the population for e-arrest, some are 3914 and some is 2771. So that means we have some of the restrictions applied to some of the arrest data elements. It might be different from different arrest data elements. I just need to, I'm checking it all individually to see, I'll give you a kind of an answer to that.
Josh's question, are there standardized answers to question 12, which is type of CPR provided? Anne, do you have the answer to that? I'm sure there are. I think generally there's kind of a drop-down field of what qualifies for that.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I thought I hung up on everyone when I tried to unmute. Could you repeat the question, please? I was looking up something else at the same time.
There was a question about if there is types of CPR provided. I'm looking in the data dictionary right now. It looks like it's type of CPR, yes. So it's type of CPR provided is ERS.09, and it's compressions continuous. Compressions
right, yeah, it's the different types that you might provide depending on your protocols. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Josh? Perfect. Okay.
So this is James. So Anne, I guess my question is there a fundamental difference just in terms of your N number when you look at e-procedures 03 when we're looking at CPR performed? If the number of incidents that we're looking at are triggered off of the crew checking whether the patient's in cardiac arrest or not, right? If you look at just the procedure itself, independent of their checking the box, does that fundamentally change what your N number is? It just seems weird that, you know, that procedure performed CPR on 54.4%. That seems odd unless it's being limited by the cardiac arrest, yes or no.
No, the cardiac arrest yes or no turns off the kind of the share questions. The CPR question is that a lot of agencies, they're not documented that under kind of the treatment section. So they're in their narrative saying that they're doing CPR, but they're not in the mindset of documenting it as a treatment. And if you don't document it as a treatment, you basically don't get credit. That makes more sense.
Yes, thanks.
So this is an aggressive increase in percentages recommended by EMS, so we want to definitely make sure this group kind of weighs in on that. So they're recommending to increase data completion standards for cardiac arrest from the current 10% to 50%.
So moved.
All right. Going once, going twice.
Josh Gaither, just
yes.
A point of clarification. Can you tell us what any possible negative implications of making this change might be?
Josh was then. So there's been the eventual implications are we would like to eventually take this to EMS Council vote to tie this to the Premier EMS program to meet a cactus standard. So by having the group recommend this standard, eventually it could affect an agency's Premier status.
And is there a annual review in which these numbers would be changed? Is this something you intend to look at on an annual, biannual basis?
Yes. So currently, this process will be to review them at EMSRUG and make recommendations, take those recommendations to TEPI, from TEPI, take those recommendations to EMS Council.
So it's Josh Gaither again. My feeling with this is that this is all back-end documentation issues. It's not patient care issues. making a big change in this number could potentially push people out of Premier EMS status or some other status for something that can, for big agencies, be operationally difficult to change very quickly. So would we be better off, and I'm purely asking, having a kind of middle of the road number, like 25, 30% as a first year step? That is 40% increase is pretty dramatic.
Josh, this is Amber. I totally would love to see improvements in cardiac arrest documentation. I think the 50%, like Josh said, is, I think it's really too aggressive for this. So when I look at the different data elements, some of these things are just really difficult to be sure of, like cardiac rhythm up at arrival destination. I think that's really hard to tell sometimes, because if they are for whatever reason have rearrested and they're doing CPR on arrival, and so I don't know how that one's answered, but some of these I question the capability to accurately document them, and then forcing them to document something erroneous to complete the call or to make it to complete the standards, and then we're not getting good quality data. That's my concern about being really aggressive with this, is that we're going to get bad, erroneous, sort of false data to complete the record and get the number.
All right, so Josh, you threw out a 25 or 30%. Do you want to pick one of those and let the group weigh in on that?
So I think I would make a friendly amendment to change that goal for completeness for cardiac arrest data points to 25%.
Anyone disagree with that who's on the phone?
I agree with the 25% also. This is Ray Pro.
This is Rebecca. I concur with the 25%.
This is Candace Williams. I agree with the 25%.
This is David, Bureau of EMS. Is that 25% over a specified time period, starting from when it's adopted?
So right now, so that's something else we'll have to discuss on the other side of this. Right now, there's a year to implement these, but we'll have to adjust that as we watch and see the performance as we make performance recommendations. If as we make these recommendations, things change and we need to adjust the recommendations and allow agencies more time to implement them, we can adjust the time frame for implementation on the Premier EMS agency side of things as well. So currently it's a year implementation time frame from the time EMS Council votes.
All right.
I think, sorry, just one more comment. This is Vatsal. I think what you said, based on just one more thing to say to add to that, is that as we do further reports, that will also help us which direction we are moving in, is, and again to keep on improving and keep on educating based on that report. So that will also guide us.
All right, if no further discussion on that, we will make that recommendation to EMS Council at 25%. Next up, next page is the opioid data elements, which is page 10. These are not elements we can adjust because they are written into statute. So this is something where the EMSRA group, currently our data completion is 57%. They recommended making that 57% and just, again, recommending education on why it's important to document these fields, but knowing that they can't adjust them. Any discussion on opioid data elements?
I'm sorry, Gail, I may have missed it. What was your data completeness for opiate element percentage?
Currently, it's 57.1%, and EMS-RUG recommended keeping it at that. Any further discussion on that one?
This is James. I guess this question would be for Ann or Ben. So on line 2, disposition .086, what does that mean in terms of the disposition?
That is an excellent question. There are some listed answers in a drop-down. These were written in rule and then revised after the opioid emergency declaration. The options are essentially were they transported to the hospital, were they transported by law enforcement to a correctional facility, to a behavioral health facility, did they leave the scene? We know there are limitations to these questions. We have discussed potentially revising them to better fit to better fit everything, but right now that would require a complete rule revision, and with that is a very expensive process. So we're just kind of having to make do with the way they exist as they are.
And this is Ann. The IT disposition .086 has different values than are available in the standard e-disposition .12, which is the disposition we're always talking about, to meet the requirements.
All right. If no further discussion on the opioid piece, we will go to the pediatric data elements. So the pediatric data elements, we are overall doing extremely well. The data completion standard for this is 80%. The only element where we're low right now, which we'd hope to really see increase, would be line 5, which is e-airway procedure. So this is just confirmation that if any type of airway is placed, including supraglottic airway, that we document entitled CO2. And so EMS-RUG recommended keeping this at 80%, as that's already a very high number, but did emphasize the importance of the education for line 5.
Gail, this is Rebecca Haro. Based on the 80% that they're meeting now, did EMS-RUG recommend that they perhaps bump this up higher for a completion standard?
They did not for this one. They recommended keeping it at 80% just because it is such a high number already.
Okay, thank you.
If no further discussion, I will hand this back over to Josh.
All right, thank you, Gail. So if I can, I'd like to briefly recap what we discussed and then ask for a motion. The brief recap is that the EMS-RUG group has suggested several data completeness thresholds. An overall core data completeness threshold of 90%, for trauma 19%, which is unchanged, for stroke 35%, which is unchanged. For STEMI, they recommended increasing it from 0 to 16%. From cardiac arrest, the recommendation of this group is to increase it from 10 to 25%. For opiate completeness in pediatrics, they recommended no change in the completeness thresholds. There were a very small number of line item changes. The ones I have listed are to eliminate respiratory effort as a required field, eliminate required, in the trauma data set. Eliminate from the trauma data set required blood glucose level, and then in the stroke data set, change destination term pre-arrival alert or activation required to only be required if symptom onset is less than 24 hours. Is that an accurate summary, Gail?
Yes.
Okay, so then let's then return to our agenda. Can I ask for a motion to approve the recommendations from the MRUGS group with the slight modifications to the cardiac arrest threshold?
This is Amber Prince. I approve the motion.
This is Ray Pro. I second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table and a second. All those in favor of this action item, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. Okay, hearing none opposed, we'll go ahead and pass this agenda item. Returning to our agenda, the next item on the agenda is updates from our groups. The trauma registry user groups is first. Melissa, are you on the line?
Josh, I don't know if you're able to hear that, but I think she's absent today.
Okay, thank you. We'll skip that update then. The Trauma Program Manager Workshop. Heather, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here, Josh. So our next meeting was supposed to be on next Friday, and unfortunately with everything going on, everything's been canceled. So our next one's going to be a couple months out now. So I don't have any new updates.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And then last, we had a lot from the EMS registry user group. Anything else from EMS Rug?
Actually, this is Raymond Proa. I didn't attend this. However, I do have some other information with the coronavirus case, or all the coronavirus talk now going around. I know I got an email from Ann, I believe on the 9th, and they added some more recommendations as far as data elements that premier EMS agencies can add into their EPCRs. Deals with documenting basically if the patient had been outside the U.S. in the last 3 days, country visited. Also had some as far as PPE, personal protective use, and that has the drop downs and all the information on there. I know Ann's on the line. I don't know if she can go ahead and chime in, but like I said, I apologize for not attending that.
That's
this is
okay,
Ann.
because all the travel questions are now dated, so that's okay, Ray.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And the only thing is just, it wasn't really a recommendation, I would say, so much as a FYI in case you're interested. There's also a PPE question that's available. It's a national BEMSTS element. And just remember to add in your crew level or your crew members with it when you add it to your PCR, so you can associate a crew member with their specific PPE. But it wasn't a recommendation so much as just as you know, educational, so you know you have it if you want to use it on your EPCR.
Perfect. Thanks for clearing that up. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you both. Moving on to item number 7, call for agenda items for the next meeting. Any agenda items? Okay, hearing none, we'll do a call to the public.
Josh, this is Dale. I just wanted to remind, since PACES, the Pediatric Advisory Committee, is a new a new meeting group, relatively new, that we will be meeting today at 1:30. I want to encourage attendance, and hopefully we'll be able to have quorum. We'll be discussing one of our new work group agenda items, which is our safe sleeping module, and I hope everybody can join us at 1:30.
Thank you, Dale. Any other items for a call to the public? Okay. Hearing none, let's move to summary of current events. The Pick Your Poison conference has been canceled. I assume the same thing for the Child Maltreatment Symposium. Any updates on the Child Maltreatment Symposium?
This is Carrie. Yes, it has been canceled as well.
I think it's probably safe to assume that anything through the end of the month has been canceled, but look for updates from those individual conferences.
Yeah, this is Dave. The Tribal Rural EMS Conference has been postponed for Kevin Knight.
And the Rural EMS Conference has been canceled.
Okay. With that, our next meeting will be July 16th, maybe in person, we'll see. And can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Ray Pro, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Rebecca will second the motion.
Okay. With that, we'll see you all at the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.